Greetings, 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 greetings. Yes. So our subject, this is Yadon. Greetings all. Our subject, thank you, please like the video, or even dislike, but, engage the video if you can, right? Like and share, for those who need to share, subscribe, also give thanks for support, donation, buy me a coffee. Anyway, the subject right here is Palestine. So our subject here in this short form content is Palestine. And there's a couple of questions that we have. And when we discuss Palestine right here in this particular vlog, this is not to get into the politics, the so-called politics, and it's not to get into the so-called politricks, right? The present 2025 politics and politricks. This is not that video, right? Here is to discuss the origin of terms. Because we hear the term Palestine, and this is Palestine, and that was Palestine. Some even say there was no Israel. It was only Palestine. I'm like, okay. So who created Palestine? Right? Who created Palestine? This is our main question here. And is there a myth? Have many people, especially in the social media age, bought into and believed into the myth of Palestine? Once again, let me just clarify the parameters right here to discuss the term, the name, if you want to call it, Palestine, and who created, right? Who created Palestine, right? Okay, all right? Yes. So, you can see what I have on the screen right there. When I picked it up, it actually, I could see it, right, with the red at the bottom right there, But then I had to do some work because I was going to share this right here, some of our research right here, to begin the investigation, the research into this, right? And there's a lot of, you can go elsewhere, you can go out there, and we're going to share some of the disinfo. There's a lot of disinfo concerning it. But there is some truth at the same time that's out there concerning the origin, right, of the term, the origin of the name Palestine, right? Palestine, like who created Palestine? Now, some say that Palestine goes back 2,000 years. Now, you see we had to actually go through some kind of color filters, contrast, so forth and so on, to bring out this one right here, right? This here basically explains it all right here, that the name Palestine was a Roman, you see what it says right here? Palestine was a Roman invention. There we go. Take that in for a moment, right? Palestine was what? Let's zoom in case ones can't see it or read it clearly. Palestine was a what? Palestine, the name Palestine was a Roman. Oh, so when you hear people say that, well, Israel never existed, or there was no Israel, there was never Israel, right? Israel. Speaking about, we're not talking about the politricks. We're not talking about the present so-called politics or the politricks. Not talking about October 7th. Not talking about the aftermath. Not talking about even what's going on right now. This is here to go into the terminology, because I hear a lot of confusing, misleading, and there's a lot of disinformation out there. I want to show you how you can get to the root of it. Now, whether you accept the truth for yourself, you say, well, why are you talking about this? Ye shall know the truth. Some are going to find this and may find this to be very offensive, right? But is it offensive because it is true? Present your facts, present your case, right? There's some things that are solidly, we could say, historical, right? We have different points of view of the same historical event horizon, concerning what the true origin of the term Palestine. And this here basically sums it up. We could just stop the vlog right here. The name Palestine was a Roman invention, right? Question asked, answered, asked and answered. It's been asked and here's answered. Palestine was a Roman invention. Now, they say, right? They say right, that the devil, right, the devil's in the details. Somebody say, hey, Yarden, you being the devil's advocate. Well, Satan is prosecuting, the devil is advocating. I don't know what you're talking about, right? That's a whole different case. The case here is about the truth, right? Is getting to know the truth, right? What's the truth of the matter, right? Because when people say that, well, Israel only started to exist, like in that particular region in 1948, now that's touching a little bit on the modern day confusion, right? And there's so much confusion. You would think with social media, you know what I mean, information going to and fro, that one would know the truth. The truth is out there. It's like the X-Files. The truth is out there, right? But you have to seek, right? You have to seek for the truth. You have to look for the truth. You have to, seek the truth. And then when you find the truth, you have to get to know that truth. You have to know what is true, right? And this is where this particular video vlog here, right? So I spent some time on that right there. Let's just go to a quick next exhibit right here. All right, so here, let's just do this right here. I want to show you a couple of our exhibits, right? And then we can deal with who's who. So here, let's address the myth, right? The myth of Palestine. Since we know now, or at least our first piece of evidence is that Palestine was a Roman invention. In other words, basically we say Palestine was a Roman creation, right? And if you say nay or you say no, then prove it. Prove that the Romans did not create, they renamed the place, right? It was what, Judea, and Judea was connected, of course, with the northern kingdom, Israel, and before the split of the kingdom, right, the kingdom of Israel, right, after King Solomon's time, right, it was split into the northern port, and all this is historically corroborated. I know some like to say, well, something's in the Bible, it's mythology, and it's not real, so forth and so on, and we get that there. Yet when we come to this particular period of time, as we come to the later, maybe 1,000 or so years, right, the countdown, especially when we get to around like after 700, what happened with the northern 10 tribes of Israel being taken into the Assyrian captivity. All of this is evidence. There's archaeology, even on the Syrian side, that basically testifies, been translated. So this is a fact, right? A fact, right? It's a fact, right? It's a fact that Israel, as the name of a people. Now, you know what? I have to say this right here, because I'm going to talk about, well, who's the real Jews, or these, or those, and that, and this, and that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about names, terminology, and basic points of history, right? So, the first thing we began off with is that, well, who created Palestine? Right? Everybody talking about Palestine this, Palestine that, and this is their land. People saying, well, this is their land, this is this one's land, so forth and so on. Well, let's look at the historical record, right? Let's look at the historical record. And when we look at the historical record, what do we find, right? Let's look at the historical record right here. Okay, so here, let's bring this. I found this this slide from a presentation, because sometimes when we go and do research, we'll read over and we'll say, okay, this here is very good, and there'll be other things that we'll say no, because we can easily disprove it. But here, this is right and accurate. This is fact, right? The residents of Palestine, right, are called, right, Palestinians, since Palestine includes both modern day. See, we're talking about, the confusion is between the modern day, the times of the Gentiles, the times of the nations, the nation states, and also with the United Nations, right? And there was a problem with this congregation of nations, even going back to the League of Nations, but that's another point right there. We're talking the modern day, right? Modern day Israel, right? And Jordan, both Arab and Jewish residents in this area were, look what it says right here. You see what it says? They were referred to, see, both modern day Israel and Jordan, right? Both Arab and Jewish residents of this area. This is going back to the 30s and 40s, right? And even before that time, right? Because remember the Ottoman Turks. Now, when I say to people the Ottoman Turks, most ones that want to either defend this or that, right, don't know the history. And I see this on both sides of the argument, right? Whether it's for the state of Israel, modern day state of Israel, or whether it's because of the Palestinian situation, the cause, or what have you, right? But from 1517 to 1917, look at the period of time we're speaking about, right? 1517 to 1917. This is history, right? That is roughly, right, 400 years. 400 years. 400. Oh, look at this. Ain't it something? Ain't it something? Ain't it something? We have 400 years ago, right? From 1517 to 1917, Palestine was ruled by the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman, right? Ottoman Turks, yeah, but here it says Ottoman Empire, but the Ottoman Turks, you know, Turkey, modern day Turkey, you can trace that back into biblical times and ancient times, the Hittites and all of these and those, right? But was dissolved. Dissolved when? At the end of World War I. Right? What do they say? They say that like the how the spoil goes to the victors. I mean, just in plain, you know, reality, right? So here, what this shows us here, this is a brief history of what's called Palestine, that the residents of Palestine, they were called Palestinians. Now, you see, people get the impression to say, well, this is the Arabs and this is the Jews, but then this is telling us right here that Palestine includes both modern day Israel and Jordan. So when we look on the modern day maps, right, and we compare it with the ancient record, right, both modern day Israel and Jordan, both Arab and Jewish residents of this area were referred to as Palestinians. I want you to get that part right there. Highlight that, screenshot that right there. Now, think about it for a moment. How does that change this whole argument today? Right? They both were referred to as Palestinians. Right? But remember our first point, right, to the first question, who created, right? What's the question? Who created Palestine? And it says that Palestine was a Roman invention. So the Romans invented something, right? Okay, let's go over here. Now, here's where we go to this. That was another exhibit there for another kind of related video, right? A related lesson, a teaching. But here people also ask, right? When did Palestine start being called Palestine? Isn't this a great question here, right? People ask, when did Palestine start, right? Start, right? Another good discussion would be, well, which name is older for people, right, that were in that land and also ascribed? Was it Israel? Is the term Israel? We have this in the Bible, right? We have this in the Bible, right? This is testified in the scripture. It also is testified in ancient, related, nearby, Near Eastern nations, right? What they call, you know, Near East, so-called pseudo-Middle East. But anyway, other nations like Assyria. Assyria testifies, right, to how they took the 10 northern tribes, right, of Israel, right, into captivity. Remember, the kingdoms were united under Saul, Shaul, under David, under David, under Shlomo, Solomon, right? The kingdoms were united under those three kings. Their rulership covers a period of like 120 or so years, right? That it's just important to understand that after King Solomon, the kingdoms were split. They had like a united, you could say, Israelite kingdom, but then they get to split the 10 tribes in the north, and then Judah and Benjamin, with some Levites, of course, but Judah and Benjamin in the south, just to bring out the number 12 right there, right? But here this says the AI overview is that the term Palestine has roots tracing back to ancient Greek writings. Now, here they talk about ancient Greek writings, right? Palestine, tracing back to ancient Greek writings, with the earliest known reference appearing in 5th century BCE in the writings of Herodotus, right? He used the term Palestine. Now, some would say, gotcha. Do you think so? Let's read on. Herodotus used the term Palestine to describe a region in the eastern Mediterranean. We're talking about near the sea, right? We're talking about near the sea, right? Which is generally understood as the coastal area between Phoenicia, right? Between Phoenicia and Egypt. Did you see what it says? Right? Take note, take note, take note. Between what? Between Phoenicia, right? Phoenicia, which is also kind of very pseudo name. Like the whole Phoenician things, Phoenician is a pseudo term, really, if you study history and look for archaeology, besides the Greeks made up that particular terminology. But yes, it is ascribed to a historical area and region and land, right? But between what they call Phoenicia, right, and Egypt, the Romans later adopted the name. You see how we're going way back right here? The Romans later adopted the name, particularly after suppressing what is known as the Bar Kokhba, right? The Bar Kokhba, right? Revolt in 135 CE. That's of the so-called Common Era or the so-called Christian era. That's speaking about the AD times, right? Renaming. Notice what the Romans did. Now, before 135 CE, right, we have Judea, right, the southern kingdom, right, of Israel, right, the whole thing. But remember, the kingdom split, right? See, this is why it's important to understand history, right? I heard that some Jews, right, you know, especially the Zionists and the European Jews, they basically have taken, like, you know, hold of the bull, so to speak, right? They even said, and this might have been some of the other, you know, Jews, like, you know, some of the religious Jews that might, you know, not really, you know, support the so-called Zionist state of Israel. But they said that there was a mistake made. They should have called it Judea instead of Israel. I just want to point that out. We can get into a little bit more of that. But before, right, Bar Kokhba, right, his revolt in 135 CE, remember in 70 AD or 70 CE, if you please, right, the temple, right, the Heyy of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. All these are historical facts. They're testified by the Romans, right? They're testified by other nations. They also testified. It's not directly, it's prophesied in the New Testament. We can see it in the New Testament. Even some can point to it in the Old Testament. It's prophesied there, but it's not really recorded, right, as happening, because the last writing we have is roughly 90, and some say in the 90, some dispute whether it's the 60s, between the 60s to the 90, you know, AD, and that's the book of John, the Chazon Yochanan. But notice how the Romans adopted the name. What name did they adopt? They adopted the name Palestine, right? They adopted this particular name, right? Particularly after suppressing the Bar Kokhba, right, revolt in 135 CE. This actually connects with the scripture. I think, what is this Psalm? Which Psalm is it? One of the Psalms. Which Psalm is it? So here we go. Psalm 83. Psalm 83 verse 4. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Look. That the name, you see what it says? That the name of Israel, in the Hebrew, Yisrael, that the name of Yisrael may be no more in remembrance. See, people have forgotten this history. This is like forgotten history here. All right? And this is an important half of the story. Amen. So you see what it says in Psalm 83 verse 4? They have said, now if you want to read more, we can get into this whole psalm here because it connects with the bigger context, but we still have some more exhibits to show you, because this goes along with this here, right? This goes along with what we're reading right here, where it says that the Romans later adopted the name, particularly after suppressing the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, renaming the province to Syria, right, as Syria Palestina. So it's renamed to Syria Palestina. Why did they rename it? Well, here, Psalm 83 verse 4, we can see it prophetically, that the name of Israel, that the name of Yisrael may be no more remembered, that people forget. And this is exactly what has happened. People have forgotten, right? And then it talks about who they are, right? They have taken crafty consult together with one consent. They are confederate, not a federate, but a con. There's a con game going on, people, right? Confederate against thee, right? Consent. They have one consent, right? They have one heart, right? They have one mind, one intention. Then it lists these people. It says the tabernacles of Edom. Now, there's a lot amongst even the other Israelites. They would say that Edom is a white man. So, but when we see where Edom was and who he mixed up with, right, biblically and also extra biblically, we can see definitely there is the so-called Arab, right, the Arab, right, the Arab connection to Edom, right, to Edom, right? But notice what it says, and the Ishmaelites, they were in bed together, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, the Moabites, and the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, right? Notice what it says right here, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, right? Then it says in verse 8, it says that Ashur or Assur, here this Assur, really it's Ashur in the Hebrew, also is joined with them. They have hopen, that's the old English expression, 400-year Bible, you know, KJV, back in the 17th century, hoping like they have helped, right? The children of Lot, or of Lot, Selah, right? Now, notice over here, they have been an arm, to say arm, you know, arm and hammer, like arm. They have been a support to the children of Lot. So here it lists these particular nations who have consulted together with one consent and are confederate, right, against thee, right? And it says right here that the name, let's get this right here, that the name of Israel, let's highlight this right here, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. So let me see if we can show you this here quickly. Okay, this is one example of the lie that you have going out there, the lies, right? Background history of Palestine. You see this right here? Background history of Palestine. I need to show you a map also, right? According to what Herodotus wrote, because some might believe that it's talking about the whole land, you know, was Palestine. No, right? Just those portions that we even see today, even in the so-called Gaza region, right? And also we can show you where between Phoenicia and Egypt. Keep that in mind, right? But that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. Here in this presentation, just an example of the disinformation out there. Background history of Palestine, right? It says here, let's zoom in on this, right? So you can see this, right? They call this history, right? This is pseudo history. It's a pseudo story. It says the area that is Israel today used to be called Palestine. Almost to imply like it was really not Israel at all, but it was just Palestine, right? And it says the Jews view Israel as their promised land, so forth and so on. But it does give some facts as we go deeper. The kingdom of Israel first formed in the 11th century BCE. This is in the BC times. This will be like in the 1000s. Right, how that goes, you know, the whole century, the BC and then AD is a little different. And lasted until it was defeated, right, in the 6th century, right, in the 6th century BC, right, after it was defeated. Now, what they mean by this, I think they're speaking like the 700s. Well, actually, that would be like, yeah, first formed in the 11th century, right? And then it says after the defeat, right, okay, yeah, BC will be, I think, the opposite way. 900 would be the 10th century, so the 11th century would be the 1200s, right? 1200s BC, right? Just stand corrected on that, right? And lasted until it was defeated in the 6th century. So the 6th century BC would be like the 700s, and this is what we told you about Assyria taking the 10 tribes, or Israel, the northern kingdom, into captivity, right? Then it says after the defeat, most Jews were exiled to other parts of the world. Now, this is not really accurate history, because remember the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Yehuda, right, and Ha-Yehudim, the Judeans and the Judahites, still remain in the south, right? And then after that, right, there was exile and diaspora, you know, but there was only the Babylonian captivity of the southern kingdom, and after 70 years they returned, right? Just want to point that out, right? So there's a lot of like truncated pseudo history here, right? But some of it generally, right, after the Romans destroyed, right, Jerusalem in 70 AD, this is what we had mentioned and what we had said a little bit earlier, so you can see that there's also corresponding evidence, right? There was a strong desire of, it says here, the Jewish people to return to their homeland. Okay, that's the first one right there. Let's go to this next one, right? So you see what it says right here? It says creation of Israel. So it shouldn't be anything wrong with us asking who created, right? Who created Palestine, right? And what is the myth, right? And the myth, or the myths of Palestine, the myths. Not just one myth, there was a lot of mythology, and it's kind of all mixed over. And then when we see what's going on today, you know, and they appeal to our, you know, our head and heart, right? You know, what do you call it? what they call a hearts and minds campaign. You know, the Palestinians have gotten very good and very savvy, and the Arabs in general, the Edomites, you know, at doing that. But here it says the creation of Israel. After World War I, the British were given control over Palestine. Palestine was considered a British mandate, right? Now, remember, who created Palestine? Palestine, as we have it in another exhibit, right? So here it implies that Israel was just created, that before it was just Palestine, and Israel was just created. No, the Romans, for the past, we saw someone here, let's see if we can just bring this up, just like to bring up some exhibits, right? This is an interesting one. Take a screenshot and kind of study it if you can. Let me clear that right there. If you can, take a good screenshot, right? And you can zoom in, right? Common Palestinian, quote unquote, family names reveal their actual country of origin, right? Now, this is what's interesting when it connects, when we go back to really the roots, right, of the Palestine connection with the Philistines, right? I said it, the Palestine connection with the Philistines of the Bible. You know, like Goliath and all of that, right? In the Bible, David and Goliath, right? So as we scroll down here, I wanted to show you the area. Let's see if we have the area here, right? Just which is the simplest, the best. The best way to really describe it right here is the bottom portion is as you're going to Egypt. And up here you see the portion that is in the kind of orange color. That would be Phoenicia. They call that Phoenicia, right? And then down there in the red, that would be, you know, Palestine. So when the Greeks are talking about this, now this connects with a very important part of history you almost hear nobody speaking of: the fall of the Bronze Age civilization and the Sea Peoples. Right, the Sea Peoples. The peoples are called the Sea Peoples. You have to go back to ancient Egypt. They had a lot of problems with these Sea People. Then they cut a deal with them and they placed them in the land. And then when the Israelites came into the land, this is why you read that there's a lot of kind of Sea People, right? Sea People encounter. So this is the same area that's pointed out as Philistia. You see Philistia right there? Philistia, right? We're going through this because we're trying to keep it, you know, as short content. So here, you see up here you see where it says Phoenicia. It says the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Notice it says Israel, Israel, Israel. What about Yehuda, Judah? That get confused with the, you know, the Jew hate and the anti, kind of the Jewish rhetoric out there. People forget about the tribe of Judah. You know, as Haile Selassie, the line of the tribe of Judah. Forget that there's a tribe of people still out there, right? Still out here, right? 924 to 722 BC. But notice where it's not. So you see where it says Phoenicia? Let me zoom in on that so you can see that clay. See where it says Phoenicia? You can rewind it to the earlier part where we pointed to how Herodotus and in Greek writings, right? We have Palestine, right, in Greek writings. And that referred to this area. You see right here, Philistia, right? Later on, Philistia. And there's an interesting etymological relationship to what is called Philistia and also what is called Palestine, right? Now, we seek to keep this as a kind of a short content video right here. But then you notice over here that even when Philistia existed, Israel existed. You see that right there? Even when Philistia, right, which later on modern day Palestine, right, existed, Yehuda or Judah existed. Just want to point that out right there, just so you'll see that. Because we want to give at least proper, you know, documentation, right? And this is the same region. So you see between Egypt, you see what it says Egypt, right? And then as you go further north, now what's called Phoenicia, let me see if I zoom in on it. You see on the side, you see where it says Lebanon? On the side is Phoenicia. You see Tyre and Nakora, right? Over right there. You see Phoenicia? So it's between, right, Phoenicia, right, and Egypt. So you see down here is Egypt, right? You see where Palestine is, right? Where Palestine is, right? Now see, this is what happened after the time of the Romans, right? This is what happened after the time of the Romans. Now, as we said, we sought to keep this as a short content, but we want to just, you know, as they say, land the plane, so to speak. So let's look at some of these over here. You see over here, Philistia, right? Philistia, right? Philistia, right? You see where you see Judah, You see where it says Judah? You see where you see Israel? Right? I just want to show you that right there. So Palestine existed, right? And it says Palestine, right, during the time of David and Solomon. So David, Solomon, real Israel, right? That means that Israel was a name ascribed to the land, right? As well as Judah, Yehuda. You see where Yehuda is? Now this basically speaks to the time of David, right? The time of David, and what we read in the Bible, David and Goliath and Saul and King Shaul, you know, and the wars that went on to subdue, right? Yes, to subdue the Canaanites. Nobody talk about the Canaanites, right? Nobody really has mentioned the Canaanites, although some of the Palestinians tried to back up their pseudo claim. They try to say, well, they're the Canaanites now. Well, if you're the Canaanites, that means you're son of Ham, and Ham is Africa, right? And then we have Cush, right? And if that be so, why did you all participate so greatly, right, in the slave trade, right, that has gone on over 1,400 years, right? The slave trade of Africans or black people, or so-called Hamites, you know? Okay, right? So now you notice when Philistines existed, according to this map right here, when the Philistines existed, Israel and Judah existed, and these lines going back and forth was the wars that was going on. So even just in a way, when we see the wars going on today, right, what they say, ain't nothing new under the sun, right? And then over here, you see over here, you see over on this map too, you see where Philistia is in that region there, right? And that's between Phoenicia. You see Phoenicia, this is an early history map, right? Phoenicia. You see Israel is on the map right there, right? That's when the kingdom was united, right? When the kingdom was united during the time of David, right? Right? So here, some say that this is a lie here. This is a lie. I want to point this out as a lie. And we need some fire for that. Right? Some fire. 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 Aish, 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 aish. Issa. Right? They say Philistine has no connection to modern day Palestine. Yes, it does. It covered a different area. Did it really? Right? Did it really? You see, we just showed you. See the lie. We're showing you ancient maps, right? And then there's history to back it up, not just from the Bible, but even extra biblical. We pointed to the Assyrians who took the 10 northern tribes, so they were in the land, right? So this is a lie here, right? This is a lie. The Philistines were not Arabs. Well, who really knows? You see what I'm saying? Who really knows, right? But Aegean, and they died out 3,000 years ago. That is also a lie. So what happened? The people just croaked? The people just died? You see what I'm saying? So we see these maps, right? We see these maps during the times of the Israelite monarchy. And see, many of them are Muslims. Many of them are Mohammedans and Muslims. And even in their Quran, it says the land was given to the Jews, right? Even in their Quran. This is what's so very, very interesting, right? And then we see Judah down there, right? We see Judah down there, right? Right? Now, the people, they say just died. No, many did die, but they had to also relocate elsewhere when the kingdoms were united, right? During the time of David, right? Well, actually, when the finishing wars against the other peoples, right? And talking about the Philistines were brought in by the Egyptians. The Philistines, these are the sea peoples in the Bible. And the period of time that we mentioned, the fall, right? The fall of the Bronze Age kingdoms, right? The Philistine states. You see the Philistine state? Ashdod, Ashkelon, you know, Gaza. You see Gaza right there at the bottom right there, next to Philistine states, right? And notice Judah is there, right? Who is Moab? Who is Ammon, right? See, this is the question we got to ask. People say, well, they just died off, right? They could have just fled into the desert, right? They could have just fled into the desert instead, right? And I'm actually giving you hints on true history. Right, true history. Roman victory, right? After the Romans were victorious over the Bar Kokhba, right? They basically restructured, right, Judea. They took the name of Judah, right, Judea off, and they renamed the whole territory, right, as Syria, Palestina, right? And notice what the Romans did. The Romans massacred, right? There was a massacre of the remaining Judahite population. That was like 135, right, AD, right, after what happened in 70 AD. You know, just want you to understand these things, right? So the timeline, we need a timeline on Palestine and the real connection to Philistine. right? Where are the Palestinians from, right? Which is a very good question, right? The kingdoms, right? The kingdoms, right? The United Kingdoms, when these other peoples were defeated, right? And here this is also very interesting because it shows like in diaspora, right, where the true Judean or Judahite tribe of Judah, right, or what may call the Jews kingdoms were. We even see over here with Ethiopia. Notice the territory right there with like the Beta Israel, right, and ancient Judahites of ancient Ethiopia, right? And we can see the kingdoms. It's showing us where the kingdoms were in the Yemen region. You see over there, right, and in Ethiopia. And then we see over here too, right? You see over here, you see the light part, the lighter part there? That might be pointing to like still territories of the Philistines or some of the other peoples, right, that basically came into the land, right? So I wanted to show this right here, right? And you see over here, Palestine. You see Egypt is over there, right? Palestine is right there, right? You see Jerusalem, right? So even the Quran states that Israel was there, right? And that the Yehudi and Jews were there. I'm not talking about modern day people. We're just talking about facts, historical facts. As we do these historical facts, we can then deal with who's who in the so-called modern Zuzu, right? So notice now, this is a fake map here. Here they want to put Palestine over the whole land, right? But this is during the time of David. This is absolutely false. So you have to be able to read, right? Fire, Aish, Isad, Aish, right? You know, so a lot of that is like, now when we're talking about, well, who are these ancient peoples, the sea peoples, and how they became the Philistines? After the defeat, many were killed, but many also relocated. And as I showed you in Psalm 83, the Confederacy, right? Just as we can see in later history with all the Arab nations, right? The 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, you know, and the other wars where they all got together to defeat this tiny old state, and we see what happened, right? It's just kind of interesting how history seems on some level to repeat itself, but it points to the ancient history too, right? So Peleshet, this is some of the names right there, right? Now we're already past, we're going into like, we often like to keep like short videos, like trying to do some short content videos, right? And so there's a lot of rewriting of history out there. And what they try to do is they try to appeal, right, to your hearts and minds, your emotions, right, and what's going on today. And then they run a lot of false rhetoric. And if you're unstable and you're unlearned, you'll buy into the lies, right? The connection between the Palestinians, right, later day, right, and the Philistines. Because what it is, it's interesting because it's the same, it's so similar, right, historically speaking, right? Because when we really get into it, we'll see that, as I showed you in the early one about the Palestinian names, that they really connect with what other countries they came from, right? What other countries they came from. And also during the time of the Ottomans. We didn't go much in depth into the Ottomans or some of the Philistines. We didn't go much into depths into the Ottomans. And that's actually from Egypt, right? That's actually from Egypt. Now, if we want to know what did the Israelites more look like, that whole Afro-Semitic, right? That kind of like Ethiopian, you know, Yemen, Ethiopian, you know, yeah. You know, if we want to see what they actually, you know, look like, right? I think we got one more right here, right? One more right there. Yeah, so this is an interesting book. If you can get a copy of it, if you can find a PDF, Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia, very, very interesting book. We see His Majesty, Kadamah Haile Selassie, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right, sitting next to what's the name? The Saudi, is that Faisal? Yeah, you know. Now remember, they were kind of made by the British, so forth and so on. I know there's a lot of hate, you know what I mean, to Ethiopia. Imagine that Ethiopia was one of the first places that allowed in, right, the Mohammedan, like, refugees. You know, they say no good deed goes unpunished. Well, look at history. So right here, this is one of our main evidences right here. All right, let's see if we can get to this right here. Our main evidence that the term Palestine has been used to refer to a region in the Eastern Mediterranean for roughly 2,000, And we will agree with that. 135 from 135 AD, right? 135 AD moving forward, but that shows and proves that that region. So when they try to say, when I show you the map of David and the Solomon and the United Kingdom, and they try to say the whole land was Palestine, that's what we said it was false, right? Because that was prior to 135 AD CE. Here it says evolving from the name of the ancient Philistines. You see that? You see that right there? I want to show and prove that. You see that right there? What does it say right there? Right? Evolving from what? Evolving from the name, right, of the ancient Philistines. The Romans, right? The Romans, right? Judaically also as Esau. Romans, read Esau, right? Or Edom, right? Romans first applied the name Palestinia, right, to the region after suppressing a Yehudi, a Judahite, a Judean revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE. All right, there we go. Now, many modern Jews, right, for us, the cutoff is like 70 AD. Right, as far as, I mean, we do study the other history, but that's the cutoff right there, right? But afterward, there were certain communities, others that were still there, and they were still poking the bear. And then we have, 135. They thought that this Bar Kokhba was a Messiah, but blessed be, the Messiah, Yahweh's Messiah, right? HaMashiach Yeshua, right? Our rabbi, the rabbi of rabbis, right? Speaking of Yeshua HaMashiach, right? Rabboni, right? Robeno. So here, while the name has been used in various contexts and also has been used, right, if we can speak quite frankly, out of context throughout history and especially on social media. Totally out of context. Right? There has never been a universally recognized independent nation state called Palestine, whether in modern history, right, or modern times, or in ancient times. This is what we have to understand here, right? So who created Palestine? Well, for the past 2,000 years, the invention of this term and the application of it, and we see other ones that came through, even the Ottoman Turks that just came in just before the British had the mandate on there, right? They just basically followed, right, within the so-called Greco-Roman pattern. That's why we still are living in a kind of Greco-Roman system, right? This Western Gentile system, right? But here's a more detailed breakdown. The name Palestine derived from the Philistines. This is facts. If we had time here, we can go through that in Psalm 80, where we have it right here. Psalm, right, here we go. Psalm 83, right? Let's go over here. You see where it says Philistines, right? Let's do this right here, just briefly, right? So you see where it says Philistines. We click on the H6429 and Peleshet, right? Peleshet means the land of sojourners. You see that right there? The land of, it's like the land of immigrants, really. The land of immigrants, right? And that's basically, that's basically what we have going on amongst the modern Arabs, right? It's like how, right? Some say like it's like, as if two thieves are fighting over stolen property, but one thief may have a little more merit, right? But still is using means of deception, right? Strong's definition: rolling, migratory. You see what? Look at this right here, migratory, right? Peleshet here. Peleshet was a region of Syria. Now notice how it is: Palestinia, Palestine, Philistia, Philistines. You see how that all goes together? Simple, easy peasy. We don't want to go much deeper in that. We went into the Roman era, the past since 135 AD to the present time, roughly, very roughly, right, 1900 plus, but roughly we could say 2,000 years. The Romans, after suppressing the Bar Kokhba, right, revolt in 135 CE, renamed the region Syria Palestinia. Remember what we just went into the Bible search and the root words and the connection as a way to disconnect the area from, not, they say Jewish history, I get what they're saying, but more correctly, if they really want to defend it, from Israelite history, from biblical and Israelite history, right? Israelite, right? Judaic, right? Talking about the tribe of Judah, and in that sense, we can say Jewish, but let's not cut off, and that's, remember I said about the two thieves, right? Medieval and modern use. The name continued to be used in various contexts throughout the Byzantine, that was like the Christian, and then the Islamic. You see, so the name was continued to be used. So the Romans set the precedent, and the Byzantines, they used it. The Islamic, like the Ottoman Turks, they used it, right? The Crusaders, they used it. And it was also used during the British Mandate period from 1920 to 1948. See, now after the original occupants, right, were, you say, kicked out, right? Speaking about Israel, going back to the 700s BC time, and then 70 AD, the last remnants, of the Yehudi, Ha-Yehudim, of the Judeans called Jews, right? Biblically speaking, modern political context, right? In the 20th century, the term Palestine became strongly associated with the Palestinian nationalist movement. Right, very violent. They had their violence and terrorism, and we don't really support that right there. And the ongoing conflict, the ongoing conflict over the region, right? And there we go. Give thanks. So if we want to know who's who, you check out this once again. Common Palestinian, quote unquote, family names reveal the actual country of origin. We have to recognize something about that particular region. We have the Arabian Desert, right? It's a desert, food, goods, the sea coast. People move back and forth, trade goes back and forth. And these people, seeing that when the Israelites, right, and the Judahites were taken out of the equation, when the Romans took over, it became like a wild land. Right? So many of these peoples, right, do not have an earlier right to that land, right, than historical, right, and biblical Israel and Israelites, as well as first century Jews and Judahites. Let's just make that very clear, right? Make that very abundantly clear. So, I guess we can end with this right here, right? The name Palestine, right, was a Roman invention. And the world that we live in is basically Greco-Roman to this very day. Brothers and sisters and brothers, please like, or if you want to unlike, the video, but engage the video. Also share it, post it to your platforms, your media platforms, Also feel free, right, to cut and edit in context, any portion of this or any of the other vlogs as well. Give thanks, and also you could buy us a coffee, and give thanks for those who do donate to this platform as well. Yeshua Shalom.